And that's my theme tonight, is outside, inside. And so if you look at the children when they're about 5, and you see that they come into the kindergarten, and they're stimulated by what's out there. Oh, there's some chairs there. We're going to make a train. We're going to have a great time. You be the caboose, I'll be the... But they need to have the stimulus from outside. Then you watch the 6-year-olds. They come into the room knowing what they want to do. It's from inside out. They don't need to see the chair. I think today we'll play store, or we'll do this, we'll do that. You see, it's coming from inside. And this is a particular gesture or an archetype from outside to inside that lives all through childhood, all the way through till about 28, where they now are figuring out through neuroscience that that's where the prefrontal lobes finally mature, and I'll get to that. It takes about 28. But yet we're treating 18-year-olds as adults. That's an interesting conundrum we have. So we have this change that happens in the young child where they go from responding to the stimulus from outside to waking up to what's inside. They're beginning to feel that they have an inner self. And then we see them come into the 1st and 2nd grade, and they work through imitation. They feel held. And most of the time, they look up to their teachers as authority. This is a real change that's happening in American culture. It's been happening for about 25 years. And that is that our children do not look up to adults as authority. You know, they challenge adults. There's a cynicism that tends to permeate, certainly through a lot of the video games and television programs, that adults are not really very smart. There's a phrase that's called the adultified child, the child who knows better than the adult. It's very interesting. And that takes a lot out of a child. It takes something out of their sense of trust, of what an adult should be. So, but they do learn through imitation, and the atmosphere in the classroom is very important. And what is it that why fairy tales? Why fairy tales form the foundation of the 1st grade in a Waldorf school? Because I think it's a touchstone of what we're looking for. Stories have been around for thousands of years. They weren't called fairy tales. They were called household tales. And people of different ages would gather around and they would listen to the stories, because the stories were the moral teachings of that people, of that particular group. So you can get Grimm's fairy tales from Germany, you can get African fairy tales, you can get Russian fairy tales, you can get North Vietnamese fairy tales. And what you find through all these fairy tales is that there's something common. And what is it? Would anyone like to say? What happens in the fairy tales? Imagination. There's imagination. How many brothers or sisters are there often? 3 or 7. Let's take the 3. So what's the first one? There's a big treasure that they're going to go find, and the first brother says, oh, go get it. And he's full of brawn, he's strong, and he doesn't get it. Then the second one, what does the second one have? He's the clever one. And he's going to figure it out. He doesn't get it because he doesn't understand nature. He doesn't understand the old people in the forest. He can't understand the language of the animals. And then there's the third brother. And what is the third brother? He's a fool, or you could say he's got the simple heart. And these are the stories that we're told. Why were those stories told? Because they were trying to teach the people several things. One is that all of the brawn and all of the cleverness is not getting you the treasure. You have to have a warm and open heart. You have to understand what the forest is telling to you. You have to understand what the animals are saying. It's also another thing that's happening in the stories about the 3 brothers or 3 sisters is that we all have those 3 parts in ourselves. We have that strong will, we have that clever head, and we have that open heart. And that's a theme I'd like to weave in today. So the stories are a very important part of Waldorf education, from preschool all the way through 12th grade. We don't call them story in the high school. We call them history, narratives, but it's story. It's the story that you choose. It's the story of your culture, the story of science, the story of mathematics. Everything has a story. And when we reduce and we take the story out of it and just have concepts, it's dry and dead. But when the story is behind it, it's alive. I remember one day a girl was coming from Palo Alto to visit the high school. She was taking an AP class, I was telling the biography of a Russian writer, and she said, you know, we take apart all the writings, but I never knew who these people were. Because AP is just very intellectual. And it was an interesting image. She said, but to sit and listen to the biography of the person who wrote this book, what a different experience you have when you are analyzing the characters and the plot. So it isn't just this intellectual thing, which is very important, but it's filled with something. So this whole role of story that continues on. And then we come to the magnificent third grade. I think the third grade in a Waldorf school is it's just life, because it's exactly what it is. The whole purpose of the third grade, who's third grade teachers? Dan is good. The whole purpose of the third grade is really to help our children become earth citizens. That is the purpose. They have come out of paradise, they've landed on the earth, and now they have to learn, how do I become an earth citizen? I have to learn how to farm, I have to learn how to make my clothes, I have to learn how to take care of everything. That's what it means to be an earth citizen. I have to learn to be part of a community. So the whole third grade year, they're making, and they're using their hands, and they're transforming matter. It's all about process. They do it in the kindergarten, but unconsciously. You know, they cut the vegetables, and they play with the wool, and so on, but it's totally unconscious. They're doing it out of just watching the teacher and doing it out of imitation. But third grade, they're cooking, and they're making, and they're doing. It's all about this, and you never forget it. It's part of your body. It's right there. You never forget it. And the result at the end is that you have children who can say, I can do anything. You know, a little bit naive, but that's okay. We'll take that. And I can do anything because they know how to use their hands. They know how to use their hands. And they know how to give. Very, very important in that third grade. But it also comes at a time when the children are changing inwardly. So they've been taking in again, especially through imitation, what their teachers have been teaching. And now third graders, I don't know if your class has gotten to that yet, Dan, you start to see one after the other go through this kind of moodiness. Do any of you have third grade children? Third grade and sometimes into fourth grade, where they start looking at you a little differently. They might use the phrase, this is not fair. I remember our family took a trip across country. We did so many nice things, so much fun. And the third grader would go, well, that wasn't very interesting. And then we would do something else that was so, great. Well, that wasn't very interesting. And it's like, oh, come on, what's going on with you? What was going on was that there was separation beginning to happen. And this inner separation of the child from the environment and beginning to step outside of him or herself and looking at the world from a rather lonely place. It's a lonely time when children go through this. We call it the 9-year change. It can happen anywhere between 8, 8.5, and 10. And what happens, you think about if you're out on a sunny day, a beautiful sunny day, and you just want to enjoy it, and then the clouds come over, and we've had some clouds the last couple of days, and the clouds come over and it gets kind of chilled, and what do? You kind of contract. And that's what's happening in the soul life of the child in this 8 to 10 period. There's a contraction, a stepping back. I don't have any friends, nobody likes me, my nose is too big, my nose is too small. There's always something wrong because they don't feel comfortable in themselves. So there's this separation, and it's a necessary separation. So it's the beginning of this awareness of I am different. I am not you, I'm me. And I may like it or not like it, but I am different. Of course, all that's come before, all that feeling of belonging, of trust, and of sense of goodness in the world is what's carried them to this point. If they haven't had that, and there has been trauma or abuse, you really see it in this 8 to 10 period because they have no use for anybody. They don't trust, and they're frightened. Deep inside, they're frightened. And there's a lot of healing that has to happen. But the general 9-year change is very normal. And it may take a year to come through. And I remember, I did teach third grade, and I can remember you could almost feel when each child has come through it that they're stable again. There's a stability, and they're ready to go. And it's like now they can really join the heart of childhood, which is really 4th and 5th grade. Full of energy, excitement, there's so many things they can do, there's so much to learn. And then you come into this next stage, where everything starts to get heavy again, but in a different way. It's like they can't stand up so well anymore. Everything's heavy. And you start to see puberty. And of course, puberty is very different from adolescence. So puberty is the physiological development of each of us in relationship to being able to be sexually active and be able to procreate our own, to be able to have children. And we're finding today more and more, it's getting a little younger and younger. You have third and fourth grade girls going into menses in some places. But there starts to be this awareness and a heaviness, and then comes this very exciting time of sixth grade. And as you've been doing, as a class teacher, as you've been working with science in first grade, second grade, third grade, it's very imaginative at first, then very descriptive, very narrative, but in sixth grade, things change. So they're trying to get grounded in the physical world. Their bodies are changing so quickly. You tend to find the girls are changing a little bit earlier than the boys. The boys have a little more time, blessing for them. There's some seats up here. And so what starts to happen in sixth grade, which is really fascinating, is that they've been playing recorder since first grade. They've been painting since kindergarten. They've been doing all these things. But in sixth grade, they get to discover the laws, the physical laws. So for example, they've been playing recorder. But in sixth grade, they get to discover the laws of sound. We call that acoustics. And they get to do experiments on acoustics. They've been painting. In sixth grade, they get to discover the laws of color and light. So now that's a whole different relationship to the world, because what you're discovering is that I can count on something. If I can't count on myself, I can count on the physical world, because it has meaning, it has laws. If you do it this way, the same thing will happen next time. If you do it that way, that will repeat itself. So they have to begin to learn this consistency. I can count on something. I may not be able to count on my friends because they're changing a lot. I may not be able to count on myself. I may not be able to count on my parents because, I'm pushing back a little bit, but I can count on the laws of the physical world. And the science curriculum in the sixth grade, which just opens up, is all, in a sense, there to meet this need in the child to feel grounded. Just the way the third grade is there so they can become earth citizens, the sixth grade is there so they can become, you could say, people of the earth who now want to live by the laws, the physical laws. And this is very exciting. It's exciting to do the experiments. It's exciting to have to say, okay, if I do this, this will happen next time. So for example, do we have any musicians here in the? Great. So if you had what instrument do you play? All kinds. A string instrument?
Guitar.
Guitar. So if you had your guitar here, and you put your finger in the middle of the string, but not so that's half and half, but say a quarter of the way down, and you pluck the long chord, the long string, what would the sound be like?
It would be higher.
It would be higher. And if you plugged the lower one?
Higher.
Which one is higher? We don't have to answer it. Then you do the experiment.
Okay.
And that's what you would do with the sixth grade. Because you see, that's interesting. You might guess, but here you have to actually do it, and you have to record it. What happened every time I plucked the long part of the string? What happened when I plucked the short part? So you become a scientist. And you write it down, and then you say, well, if it was like this yesterday, what is it like today? And you begin to see that these laws are stable. They're stable. You can look at your own neck and the muscles in your neck, the Adam's apple and so on, particularly for the men. And let's think about this string. So I want you to do an experiment with me. So let your neck relax your neck, just relax it. And now you're going to speak in a very low voice, and I'm going to say, long ago and far away. Come on, you do it too. Long ago and far away. Now all of a sudden a little mouse runs by. You go, eek, eek, eek. Feel it. Eek, 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 eek. Okay. So what are you experiencing in terms of the length of the muscle? Which one is longer or relaxed? Which one's tighter and shorter? Try it. Just do it for a minute. What are you discovering? What did you discover? Yeah. And that's the kind of thing we get to discover, not because someone told us it, but because we're able to do it and test it out every time. And this is part of the 6th grade. It's learning to understand that there are laws that govern the physical world, whether it's acoustics or light and color, electricity and magnetism. And one of the wonderful courses in the 6th grade, of course, is geometric drawing. So up until this year, they've been drawing geometric figures, they've been walking them, running them, but now they get to use the tools. It's part of this life as a scientist now. So they get to use the compasses and protractors, and they begin to see what happens when you divide a circle into 6ths, into 12ths, and so on. Oh, these forms, these geometric forms are not only beautiful, which they are, but we find them in nature. We find them in nature. And I remember when I had a 6th grader, we made a big volcano out of paper mache, and we put a can in the center, and we put ink and soap bubbles and dry ice. And we did this in front of an assembly on a big 4x8 plywood. And then they dropped the dry ice in. And what do you think started to happen? It mixed in with the ink and the soap, and all of a sudden it starts to come up to the top of the volcano, and it starts to go down, and it's oozing down the side of the volcano. And once somebody had to come carry it out because it was oozing down onto the floor. But what was so much fun was that the students said, look, they're hexagons, those bubbles are hexagons, because we'd been doing geometry. And you know, this ability to look and see and not just take someone's word for something is something so powerful about that 6th grade curriculum, and wonderfully fun to teach. And also because they're getting so wiggly and their bodies are changing so much, they can count on this. They can count on the fact that the physical world has certain rules that are going to apply. Doesn't matter how they feel about it, it's still going to apply. So they start to go through a lot of changes. So physically, it's like a roller coaster, you know. And I'm going to draw something here. It's very primitive. So what's happening in 6th and 7th grade is that they are developing millions of new brain cells. And this area is just popping all over the place. And with that, they're thinking, they're starting to wake up in different ways. They're thinking about different things. They're becoming more concrete in certain ways and more abstract in other ways. The place where you see it as a parent might be they love to argue. Have you experienced that? They are able to use words with power. And they can push you and push you and push you until you're so frustrated that you say, because I said so. That's why you're doing it. Because they'll wear you out. They have energy. They have all this energy. And they just push because they've got these new ways of thinking, and especially the way they use language. So you might find in your classroom that they can become actually very cruel at times. They can tell sick jokes. They start to enjoy things that are a little bit off color. They're beginning to realize they have power now. It's not in the power of the doing that they did in 3rd grade, it's the power of their language. So they're being able to work their words as power, which is better than swords as power. And that the waking up of language is a beautiful thing. Thank you. And so it's a time when the literature curriculum particularly brings in the beauty of language. Because there's almost a fascination with words, because they're looking to see which ones they can use in different ways. And so this whole way of thinking, they're taking in the world now through the thoughts, they're absorbing the intentions of people, they're absorbing the words of their parents, the words of their teachers, and they're not so sure that they agree, because they're looking at everything, everything's being measured. So we have this amazing capacity beginning, it's just the beginning capacity to think abstractly. And then at the same time, and again, the girls usually a year ahead of the boys at least, they are also exploding with hormones. which result very much in a kind of instinctive life. So you can see this in aggression, you can see it in wanting things for themselves. So there's this I want, I need, and then being able to look out and sort of take someone else apart. They're wonderful at knowing how to ruin your day. They know just what to say to just sort of take the knife a little bit in and twist it. The problem is that they forget about it then, but you don't. So you feel terrible. They say things, they have no idea what they're saying. 7th, 8th graders, they're so sensitive inside and so totally insensitive to what they're saying to other people. They can say things that are downright cruel. They don't even realize it. But if you say something that might in some way hurt their little soft self, oh, that's terrible. That's terrible. And I'm not being sarcastic. It's life. I'll tell you the story of a 7th grader. This is a true story. So he was going to played hockey, ice hockey, and there was a particular parent who had very bad body odor. And so this 7th grader was sitting there in the front seat with this woman, and he was telling her how she could improve it. 7th grade, he was telling, maybe you're not using the right kind of soap. And going on and on with this. It was none of his business. And then one day she appeared at school, and he was walking around like this. Of course, his teacher found him, and they had to deal with it. I was just trying to help her. From his point of view, I'm just trying to help her. It's really awful. She needs help. No tact, because 7th graders don't have tact. Tact is something you learn, here's what I really want to say. Here's the way I can say it so it doesn't hurt somebody. Well, they don't have that. It's not there. You need to have a real sense of self to be able to be tactful. So it's just an example of these kinds. Another example, I was on a trip with 6th graders. We went to the Junior Museum in Sacramento, and I had this boy, Eric, who was just one of these children that, be so proud to be a parent of. He was just always doing things the right way. And not because he was a goody-goody. He just was a genuinely good kid. And we were standing in front of the museum, and a school bus went by, and Eric reached over and he picked up a rock, and he threw it at the school bus. And he stood there like this. He couldn't believe he had done that. It was a total impulse. And of course he felt terrible, and we had to deal with it. But it's this instinctive push that just comes through them without any thought. This impulsive life of not being able to understand that there are ramifications for our behavior. They don't have it. What's happening, so they have this extreme possibility of acting instinctively, impulsively, aggressively. They have this capacity to begin to think coolly, more abstractly. So you have a lot of heat here and a lot of cool here. And that could almost push a person into bipolar. But what we are missing, of course, we're missing the heart. And what we really struggle with in Waldorf education and try to make as real as possible is that when we're working with our thinking, that we take it through our feelings into our will activity. When we're going to be doing something, that we have to take it through our heart and think about what we're doing. So this becomes a kind of motif for the teacher in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. And it's a really different approach to education, that it really matters what kind of a feeling life we're dealing with here, that our heart is really the place where the two meet and transform. They don't get stuck there on either end. So what we think, if we're planning an activity, say it's a class trip, and the students are involved in thinking about it and planning it and having to go through all the details, they also have to look at, well, is everybody included? Where's the heart here? And then let's get on and do it. So almost everything we do has these 3 parts to it. But we can also separate and become much more extreme. We say, I want my kid to be, very high grades. I want him to push. I want him to be, looking at where his future is. I want the pressure on him because the world is a tough place to be. I want my kid to be a jock. I want him to, or her, to be able to, work toward getting an athletic scholarship. I mean, this is the stuff you hear. And so all the emphasis is here. And this is a lot of dog eat dog, and this is dog eat dog. I'm going to outthink you, I'm going to compete with you, I'm going to do a better grade. So we see this all through our society right now. And we can see that there's a lot of emphasis on kids being very, I won't even say smart, but do very well intellectually. And I think doing well intellectually is important, but not at the expense of everything else. And we want our children to then also be able to use their limbs and be able to do things, make things, be things, but we want them to be whole human beings. And in 7th and 8th grade particularly, this is so important because it's easy to say, oh, they're almost high school. So let them start specializing. Let them get ready for high school. Or let them do just the things they like to do and let's not bother with all the other things. So these are the struggles that we begin to see as we look at particularly 7th and 8th grade. So something is missing. Something is missing. And you know, when I began my Waldorf training, which is over 50 years ago, we didn't have neuroscience. And so, you know, that wasn't there. In fact, we didn't even know of DNA at that time. It's hard to believe it. We did not know about DNA. And so the world has changed a lot. But I remember when I was doing my training and we were knitting, and we say, well, why knit? I mean, I'd like to knit, but what's that got to do with education? And I remember one of my teachers saying, well, it has to do with your thinking. I mean, well, yeah, you kept a pattern, you think of your numbers, you follow it, you have to be very careful. You take a thread and you take it through. I could find metaphors, but we live in a time now where they know what knitting is, that every stitch you take, you cross the midline between the two hemispheres. I mean, it's fascinating. All the things that children are doing from kindergarten on, all the games, all those country type of games, so many things unconsciously we're helping children become full human beings, helping them to bring the two sides of their brain together to be able to become just free. So we have so much research today, and yet I don't understand it, why we could know so much and we can educate so poorly in this country. And not just in this country. It's a conundrum. We have all this research. So what Waldorf education is trying to do is meet the child where they are and help them become strong and ready for their next step. So what is it that we're talking about? So from the time a child is born, their brain, of course, is developing. And we know, again, so much now about how the environment and how the role models and how the activities that children do affect the development of the brain. It's very plastic. It's plastic in the sense of malleable and changing all the time. And yet there's not a center. Very dependent on what's coming from outside. You have the center of that human being, who that human being is, but it's a dialogue between the child and the environment. And then around 6, there comes this big spurt in the prefrontal lobes. And then around 9, another one, and this is all graphed, and another one at 12, another one at 14, and then the biggest one is 16, 17. Now, the prefrontal lobes are responsible for what's called executive function. In other words, the ability to understand that what you do today has repercussions in the future. So if you're angry at someone, hitting them, and then your parent or your teacher says, didn't you think? No, because they couldn't think. They can follow what their teachers have taught them, what their parents have taught them, but they don't have the capacity yet, fully, until around 16, 17, to understand from inside that if I do this, here's what's going to happen down the line. And that's really important. And that big spurt that comes around 16, 17 does not fully finish until around 28. Isn't that amazing? And we know we live in an adolescent society, but this is fascinating. And so that's why when we look at our 6th, 7th, and 8th graders, we have to remember they're babies in a certain way. But at the same time, they've got bodies that are starting to look more and more like us, And they're starting to do some really exciting things, and they are thinking things through, and they are collecting things. They love to collect at this age, and they like to have mastery over things. And so they like to do work and, you know, to have hard math problems, to make maps, because you feel power when you do these things. They're very, very important that you are able to constantly be able to use your artistic work in service of your intellectual work and vice versa. But that's not the same as understanding. So in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, they're being exposed to so much of the world through the curriculum. Rudolf Steiner calls them the treasures. And then what happens, they lose them. They forget everything. They get into the high school and they can't remember they ever learned that grammar or whatever it was. And oh, my teacher never taught it. And the teacher did teach it. But they've forgotten it because they're going through so much interchange that it's almost, a friend of mine said it beautifully. He said there should be a sign that says, closed for reconstruction. That's what's happening, that the child is having to integrate the thinking, the feeling, and the willing. They're having to integrate all of this into their being, and it's not easy. So some will go more into this direction. They might become nerds, and others will go more in the direction and become jocks, and then you have your students who are more involved with the artistic, and they might go more in the feeling level. We need all three. And we want our children to experience thinking that is filled with meaning, not just memorizing, but meaning. We want them to have experiences that connect them with community. We want them to be active and willful and doing things that give to others. So we want all of these together. And if you look at the curriculum, you begin to see the genius of it. And then, of course, every teacher has to develop it in his or her own way. And that's the freedom with the teacher. Because teachers have different strengths, teachers have different passions. So one teacher might love to do outdoor work and takes the class on many more trips than another teacher. That teacher may do other things. My oldest child had a teacher who felt the students never did enough physical work. So he would have them hoisting rocks from the American River and carrying them, across campus and then building stone walls around one of the buildings. And that class, they were just like, we could do anything, And he really, but he was not an artist. He really struggled with painting. And so another teacher would come in and do the painting for that class. And so it worked out. But what he gave those children as a gift out of that passion he had for physical work was something another teacher didn't. Another teacher gave a different passion. And so this is where so much depends also on who are the teachers. Who are the teachers? What is it they care a great deal about? And what is it that brings them all together is this view of the child, this view of the human being. That's the center that comes out of anthroposophical thinking. So, all right. So we have this period between 12 to 14, 15, and we can see them going in different directions. Waldorf education offers a way of looking at this, which I think is very helpful. I mentioned story. So story has to do with meaning. And if we follow the curriculum, and by 5th grade they're working with the ancient civilizations and very much coming to this picture of Greece, ancient Greece. Ralph Waldo Emerson, the American philosopher, said, everyone has a Greek period when we wake up to our thinking. We all have a Greek period, and that's very much the 5th grader. They're just starting to think about these things. They're interested in civilizations, how different they are in different places. This is the beginning of the treasures that they're starting to experience. And that story changes into the 6th grade with Rome, with chivalry, with perhaps South America, Latin America, and it goes on 7th grade with the whole burst of the Renaissance and so on. And what's happening is you're moving from mythology in 5th grade, the big 5th grade shift, from mythology to history, to real history. And I remember in 5th grade, they clapped. They wanted history, they were so ready. They loved myths, but real people who lived at a particular time and did real things, it was very exciting. And so you move into biography, and biography becomes the story from now on. biography in the 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, the biography of the great people. Why biography? Because that's the human journey. That's where we read and we hear about people who had many challenges in life, many obstacles, but here's how they met them. So what we're placing in front of the children are different role models through the biography, that they can begin to see people make choices about their lives. So story takes us all the way through, and the story brings meaning. Then you can ask yourself, what are the stories that are coming to our children through the movies today? What are the stories? What? What was it? I can't hear.
To me, the movies are weak.
Why are the movies weak? But what is the story? What are the stories that you're seeing portrayed over? Not all movies are bad, but
Comic books. You say
the comic books is very interesting. The comic books have come back into vogue. Why do you think? There is a hunger for pictures. There's a hunger for pictures in our children. What's on their walls? Posters. Something hasn't been fed early enough with inner pictures. So they're hungry. And comics are fun to read, and you don't have to read the whole book. You just read the comics. So that's interesting. And there's also, of course, the Japanese anime and so on. It's really taking hold. Whenever something becomes a fad, you have to look at it and say, what is it? It's feeding something. It's feeding something. I'm not saying it's good or it's bad. It's feeding something. What else are the stories of today? Yeah.
Redemptive violence.
Say it again.
Redemptive violence, where it's okay to go after them if they did something bad to you.
Yes. Yes. That's a big one. Revenge. And they just eat this up. What else?
That there's clear bad guy and good guy.
Well, that's nice in 1st and 2nd grade. But by the time you get to 6th and 7th grade, you need to learn there's more subtlety involved, right? But that black and white thinking is still there and needs to be guided. Television programs, the ones they're allowed to watch or the ones they do watch, what are you seeing? Or let's put it this way, what about the ads? Commercialization of everything, of our bodies, of our values. Yeah. Yeah.
Something that you need that's outside of yourself.
That you want to get. Or that will make you, if you just get that, you'll be liked better. Oh, that's very powerful. I mean, it affects us as adults. You know, if I only had that, more people would like me. If I only had that, I'd be happier. If I only had that. And we know in the end it doesn't work. It's what's inside. But it's very tempting, isn't it? It's very tempting. Yeah.
That same sort of concept, but in terms of, like I see my daughter, she's in 6th grade now, and the whole boy-girl thing is like coming into their stories and into their lives more and into their relationships.
A little louder.
Who's my boyfriend? Who's my girlfriend? And sort of in that same way, looking outside for that fulfillment, you know, but in terms of a love relationship. And we all know, you know, like you kind of have to be whole inside to make those work too.
And we know that's not what the boys are thinking. So what you start to have here is a different story, and you start to have very interesting, the girl tending more, I'm generalizing, of course, with exceptions, but you tend to have the girl becoming very much in her fantasy, and relationships are the most important thing for girls in general. And you can go way back to early childhood. The importance of relationship is very powerful. They've even done these studies where they've put a tape-recorded voice in the crib. I don't stand behind it, but this is, anyway, the voice in the crib. The little boys will pay attention to the voice, and the girls will not. They want to see a face. It's very interesting. The girl is far more in that relationship area, and for the boy, it's more objective. It's not good or bad. It's a different way of looking. And I mean, a humorous thing that happened one time, I was doing some parent work, and the question was asked, what do men think about such and such a situation? And I'm glad we have a lot of men here. All the women's hands went up. I I said again, what do the men think? And the women, I said, sit on your hands. I'm not asking you, I'm asking the men what they think. And there was this dead silence. And then, I learned so much through this. And then it was very quiet, very uncomfortable. And then this man came from the back, and he stood up and he said, he did two things, which I'll never forget. One was, he said, I will just pretend that I am my wife. And she says to me, what do you feel about it? Don't you have any feelings about it? What do you really feel about it? And he says, at that point, I go blank. And then he said, and this was the best thing, he said, men, boys, again, spectrum, people who are more on the spectrum, whatever, like to do things shoulder to shoulder. And then he said, it was the most wonderful help. He said, if you want to talk to your boy, have him next to you, go for a walk, go fishing, go in the car. Do not stare him straight in the eyes, because it'll just terrify him. Now, there are exceptions, but by and by, shoulder to shoulder. And often, shoulder to shoulder, you don't even have to talk. You just are. And there's something so fulfilling in that. Whereas for most girls, they want to do eye contact because they're reading all of the innuendos from the look in the eyes, the face. It's different. And again, you'll have some girls who have more to this and some boys more to that. But in general, and the important thing is to do it both and get to know your child. But the key is that we don't often do that with our boys. Women, we try to treat them the way we treat girls in some ways. And we know they need big things to move and to push and to wrestle with. And they need to use their big muscles. And sitting at a desk is very hard for boys. This is why we have so many boys who are labeled ADD or ADHD. Because if an educational system is that you're always sitting, you're going to get boys having trouble. They just can't do it. They have to get up and move around. And luckily, we do a lot of that in Waldorf education. It's very, very important. And so I mention that because this particularly comes out during this time of 6th, 7th, 8th, and even into 9th grade. So the curriculum is based on story with meaning. And by the time they get into the high school, the stories with meaning are analyzed and synthesized and really take it onto a very high intellectual level. That's in the high school. So it's a journey where more and more the awakeness is coming from inside out. All right, and then the feeling life, if you think, now what is it that meets that feeling life in Waldorf education that's so important? It has to do with the role models. And role models can be teachers, they can be other parents, they can be figures they read about, someone they are looking up to, and they are watching you all the time. They can talk about their parents, and boy, they've got you absolutely figured out. They can talk about their teachers, and they've pretty well got them figured out. But they're still in awe. They're still in awe. But they're starting to use that critical thinking of that 7th, 8th grader, sometimes 9th grader still, where they're trying to figure out, what do I want to be like? Who do I admire? So what happens to our children? They start to admire a baseball player. And what do they learn? What happens to them?
Competition.
Well, not just competition. What's happened to a lot of our baseball players and football players? And yes, that's a nice way to put it. Right, and they start finding out, oh, this one has been arrested for this, and this one has been violent. And it just knocks them right down. These are role models for these children, or stars, movie stars, or singers, is where the children tend to go. And they put them up on a pedestal, and they come down. And that is so heartbreaking for a child of this age, 7th, 8th grade particularly. They're looking, what do I want to be like? You know, maybe one day I'll get a baseball scholarship and I'll be like so-and-so. And they're looking all the time. Or what's Uncle Joe like? You know? And it's wonderful as parents for you to share some of your stories with your children. What were some of the challenges? How did you overcome them? And then you'd be surprised how this generation of children is very different from your generation. And what's interesting about them is how much they like their parents. It's fascinating. It's wonderful. We're not dealing with a rebellious generation right now, these millennials, and even beyond the millennials. They're not rebelling. They're not saying, I can't wait to get away from my parents, I can't stand them. They might say that, in a moment, but it's not what's happening. They hang around. They don't leave. They don't leave. Some of them become teachers, and they want to know how safe are they going to be. Would you have retirement? They're 21 years old. They want to know if you have retirement plans. So different. It's a completely different generation of teachers. Right above them, and parents, are the Gen Xers, and many of you probably fall into that, and very different. They can be, and I'll just generalize because I don't want to talk about each one of you, but often you'll find, and it's an interesting thing for Waldorf schools, because you tend to have your older teachers are boomers. They have married the school, they've given their lives to the school, they've worked so hard, sacrificed a great deal, you still have a few around, and then comes this next generation, and they go, I'm not doing that. I've got yoga on Thursday. I've got this. I've got to have a life. I've got to have a life. I mean, I watch what you people do. You have no time for anything else. I've got to take care of myself. At the same time, I love this education, but if don't do exactly what I think you should do, I'm out of here. I'm out of here. It's very interesting. It's very interesting. The older parents would say, I love Waldorf education. Maybe my teacher isn't perfect, but I believe in the whole thing and I'm really supportive. Not true today. Not true today. Especially if there are choices. If they don't feel you're right there where they think you should be, they'll change schools. There's no awe. There's respect, but there's no awe. It's very different. And I'm not saying it's wrong. It's just, you have to deal with it. You have different generations in a school. Parent body, teacher body, it's very different. And then you have the next generation that comes in. Well, and that Gen X generation is fascinating because they know technology. They're the ones who came in on technology. And they look at the older teachers and go, what's the matter with you? You're still doing things the old-fashioned way. It's not efficient. Come on, get on with it. And the boomer generation is going, look, we changed the world, but we didn't change technology, but now we have to learn it, right? We have to learn it, and it's hard, so teach us. And now you get the next generation, and for them, it's like air. They're breathing it. Technology, they're not afraid of it. They just move things around, change them. If I need something done, I call my 13-year-old grandson next door. Charlie, come over here. He says, Grandma, when it's on Wi-Fi, this is what it means. When it's not on Wi-Fi, this is what it means. And you can do this. How do you know all that? Anyway, but it's very interesting because it has to do with this question of role models. So we're seeing that we have different generations of families, different generations of teachers, but something that's the same for all of our children is that they're really looking to be recognized. They're looking to know that you see who they are becoming. This is the most important thing, that their teachers recognize who they are becoming and that the curriculum is nourishing that so they begin to see the possibilities. And then the third one, how do we transform this impulsive life? And that's very much through service. So the different projects that one takes on in the school, how that is that we work together to give to others. This classroom as a community, the school as a community. This is so essential. So we could segue into another whole area, but that's another talk. Because what's happening here is that these experiences of the 7th and 8th grade particularly are developing in the children a sense of meaning. If you don't have a sense of meaning, then you become cynical. And you feel you can use people and just get on for your own benefit. If you aren't able to use your arms and legs in service of others, then you become isolated and lonely because it's hard to be part of a community if you can't give to others. And if we can continue to find role models, whether it's in the curriculum, in the history we've learned about, in the different stories, in our teachers, in our parents, to really see that being a role model is a responsibility. It's this interweaving of these three elements that gives the children at this age a pathway for the next stage of life. There's a Russian psychologist whose name was Elhonin Goldberg, and in the 90s, he described this period of 7th and 8th grade, extraordinary. He used this term. He said, it's the time of the civilizing mind. What we do in those years, those 2 years, in relationship to, I would say, he didn't use these words, thinking, feeling, and willing, into meaning and role models and service, what we do there civilizes our children. I mean, think about the time of the civilizing mind. What an expression. So I have followed him, and now he's in his 80s, and he's writing about executive function for old people, the elders, and I love that because he's moving along. But in the 90s, he focused on this age. And then he talks about how this is related to the growth of the prefrontal lobes, and how what we are doing as adults for children of this age is we are acting as the role models to carry them through basically to 16, where this next big spurt of brain cells occurs. Now, in Waldorf education, we might not use that language, but it's a perfectly good language. We might use the word and say that around 16, the executive function comes in, but also we say it's the coming in of the I am. It's the sense of the self. But you have to, in order to do that, you have to have a healthy physical body. You have to have a brain that has not been ruined by drugs and alcohol, or you haven't become addicted to computers. So what we're trying to get the children through to these next years is so that they are free to be able to awaken to themselves. And this goal of the 7th and 8th grade, if you don't have a high school, is extremely important that you give the children that gift to then move on to that next stage where they will perhaps become more focused in one area or another, but you've given them that capacity to develop further. Thank you. So if there are any questions or any comments, please.
Can you talk to how all of this needs to be shifted younger and younger?
All of this what?
Every stage, like the 9-year change, is that happening at 7?
Not really.
Okay.
Not really. Although children are becoming more individualized, that's what you see. And I don't think a whole shift is happening, but you're starting to see more individuality in children. And the more we can hold to this archetypal picture of childhood, the healthier the children are. It gives them a chance to grow into that next phase. I think it's easy for us to see that. We don't want to make our 5th graders into adolescents, please not. But we see it around us. We see the clothing, we see the messages that are coming to our children, our girls in 4th and 5th grade being body image aware very early. And we saw what happened when they started to manufacture thongs for babies and 5-year-olds, that people screamed and yelled, and they stopped. And J.C. Penney's, when they were selling only the midriffs, parents refused to buy it. So now they made the long shirts, and that took, when people buy, the stores respond because they're there to make a profit. And you have to yell back at these things, because they have an expression in marketing called the tweens. Tweens. They're not children and they're not teenagers yet. And if they can get them at that age, they have them for their brand done. And it's very interesting to get onto the web and read some of these marketing protocols for how to attract the tweens. They're open, naive doors, just waiting, because they still have this look, They want to belong, they want to feel that they're older than they are. And marketing is so heavy on that. You have to fight it. And this is where a school community can work together. It's where, or class community, what's allowed, what's not allowed. You have to give a little more freedom, in 7th and 8th. But still, you have to hold your boundaries. You have to really hold those boundaries, because they will just move as far out as they can, because they're looking ahead at the teenagers. And they want to be like that. That's their role model. And there are some wonderful teenagers as role models, but they're seeing the computer-generated role model, they're seeing, the television one and so on. Yeah?
What can you say to help understand the behavior of a 13 or 14-year-old who is very critical of others, especially within his family, and dismissive of ideas from others?
Yeah, well, they're kind of stuck right here. And that abstract thinking, that cynical thinking is coming in. It will pass. It will pass, but it's painful. And I think the most important thing with that age and kids like that is getting them into doing things, into group projects, getting them into organizations. I don't know what's around here a lot, whether it's...
Maybe I could, like this particular son of mine, is, like he only identifies with athletic activities. So it seems like there's a big man, it's not, but on your diagram, like mentally he's very dismissive of others, but physically he's all about the sport.
Right, so that's where it's not surprising, his body is changing so much, and he's looking at an image of what he would like to be. And so he's taking this energy and he's projecting it, onto the athletes, and they're pretty exciting to look at athletes. I mean, the place where you really can see it in the children is if you, say your 7th grader plays basketball, just as an example. He plays basketball and he's doing a good job. Then you go and you watch high school basketball. What do you notice is the difference in the physical body of the boys or girls? They're beautiful. They're beautiful.
I have a young girl that I just love very much who attends this school, who is 16 and who loves her iPad.
Mm-hmm.
And she's obsessed with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I really feel as though it's stealing a big portion of
Yeah.
her life.
Yeah.
And I know her parents, and I would like to wean her off some of the hours at least. And I was wondering what approach you would have to assist.
Okay, hold it. Good. I don't want to forget your son. I think it's perfectly normal for children to hit onto something and be obsessed about it. It's part of, they're trying to figure it out. They're really trying to, and a lot of fear, and again, especially with boys, is, will I be strong enough? Will I be able to defend myself? So to fixate a little bit on an athlete is not a surprising thing.
He is an athlete.
He is an athlete. It's even more so, yeah. Then he's feeling that power in himself, and there's a tremendous power in being able to master your body. And when I said, what's the difference between a 7th grade basketball player and, say, an 11th grade basketball player, is the difference is the 11th grader has such a mastery that they make it look as if it takes no energy. I mean, you watch them, and magnificent. And that is something that a boy who loves athletics admires, of course. There's nothing wrong with it. They get a little bit obsessive, they do. And the question is, how do you hold it so it doesn't become so totally obsessive, whether it's the athletics or it's the iPad? I mean, my 7th grade son, who's now 50 years old, he became obsessed about speed skating. He wanted to buy speed skates. They were $90 back in the day. We're not going to spend that money. He earned the money. He got the speed skates. I took him every Saturday. After a couple of weeks, he was done. But it was his money. He had spent it, and he got something out of it. You go with their interests. You support their interests up to the point where you feel it's taking away from everything else. But it's like they're trying on different clothes. It's not bad to be an athlete at all. But if it is in the way of everything else, then you've got to say, okay, let's get some balance in here. And that's where you as a parent have to say yes and no. But obsessing is like trying something on to see what it's like. And it's exciting, and there are lots of role models out there for it. I wouldn't worry about it, but I don't know the whole story. But, and the iPad thing is a little different.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but she's 13.
She's 13. That makes it more, yeah. Well, that's more of a, I'm not as concerned with a 16-year-old with it. The whole computer thing is coming from outside. And it's a wonderful tool. We all use it to some degree or another. It is addictive. You know, I'm very aware of where my iPhone is all the time. You know, I had a problem with AT&T yesterday, and I had no iPhone for about 4 hours. You know, I can feel a panic. What do I do? I still have a landline, but I only check it once a week. So anyway, but why? You said something very important. It steals away the life. You feel yourself when you're on the computer, you get tired. It drains your life forces. And for a child, a 13-year-old, 14-year-old, where their life forces are just blooming, that's what they have. They're in this wonderful stage. They need every little bit of life force they have. So it's boundaries of how much. You're not going to get rid of it. No, you're not going to get rid of it. But how many hours? It's too much. More than an hour is too much. And what are they doing on the iPad? That's the other question. Yeah.
I think you've described a beautiful education in linear terms, though, in almost linear terms. And if there is a deviation from that, like an eye disease, and the iPad gives somebody,
course.
you know, so
Absolutely. We're using general stories.
Yes,
I agree completely.
I understand that, but it is that there is an ebb and flow.
Absolutely.
To you know, where the 9-year change could happen at 7 or at I had an 11-year-old who was shaving. I had
Sure.
You know, I mean, so I think there's that Waldorf too can get stuck in its it's this.
Sure.
And so I just worry that, you know, because I had 2 kids who deviated.
Sure.
And yet I stuck through this.
You stuck through it.
I stuck through it, and I'm worried.
You know,
I do worry.
You're touching on something important, and it has to do with research. I mean, the role of the teacher is to observe the child. And you're going to have different children going through different stages. You have a general, and you work with the general, and then you look at this edge and that edge, and you're always having to look, and you think back, and you know, at night you look back at your class, how different children did things. Absolutely. And when you're talking about the iPad for someone with eye disease, we're not talking about that right now. Of course, technology has brought so much good in so many ways. Absolutely, no question about it. There's no question about it. It's when you have a child obsessed with something at this age and not going out to play and not doing other things, then you have to look at it and say, okay, let's get some balance here. We're not saying don't use it at all at this age, but balance. What are you not doing? Where are your friends? Oh, I have lots of friends on Facebook. Well, are they friends? Are they really friends? They may be friends. I mean, I'm on Facebook, but are they friends? Sure.
I understand, you know,
But you have to have a trajectory of what you're looking for. And then you have to be able to stand there and say, now there are exceptions. Always. There are always exceptions. But if you don't have a sort of picture of the general, you are doing this all the time. You have nowhere you're going. So I appreciate that. But I hope you don't feel you're stuck in what you've stayed with Waldorf. You'll have to see. You'll have to see. The jury's out.
the jury's out.
Good. Okay.
My son is in 8th grade, and he's already having so much procrastination. And I was always an A++ student, and I just don't get it. And it's not that I'm saying, you know, how can you do this? It's more like I'm trying to, what's behind it? And it's so bizarre. It's like, why would you wait to the last minute to do your homework? Well, I don't.
You're so logical. You're so logical.
No. It's like, no. So I'm saying, okay, so as a parent, if I become too active, of course,
Yes,
there's more
of
resistance.
of course.
If I say, look, it's your life, it's your homework, and
It's too
so
early.
on, maybe it's too much. So how do we find the balance? We're maneuvering something
You are. You're
what is
always,
this?
well, he can't be you. He's not you.
No.
And he also has to learn from his mistakes. But then how far do you want them to learn from their mistakes? How much do you want to protect them? How much do you not want to protect them? And this has to do with you and your child, temperament. You're very different. And it's being a parent is like walking on sand, and it's constantly shifting. There's no easy answer. And it's literally, you let a little rope out, you pull it back in. You let a little rope out, you pull it back in. And we all make mistakes. And you keep trying another day, and you keep going with it. But if you have the confidence of a certain value that you feel, that yourself, and you serve that, you go with that. I mean, so many youngsters who will say, I got so furious at my mother or father because they wouldn't let me go to do it. And then now in 12th grade, I'm so grateful. That's very typical. Very typical. You have to remember, you're the adult. You are the adult. That's the job you have. And they're not going to like you every day. They just don't. And you're going to have to figure out, okay, what am I going to do so he gets his work in? He's procrastinating. It's due tomorrow. Well, what happened 3 days ago? Did I set some boundaries there? You know, he's not going to do it on his own. Some kids will. That's a different child. So you have a little challenge there. But he's not you. And that's the thing. It's so easy for you. You don't understand why he would do that. And he'll probably be fine. One more, and then we should stop.
In a day and age when it feels like technology is moving quicker than our own evolution,
Yeah.
As a parent, it's hard, it feels challenging to predict what best skill set
That's
give our
right.
children
That's
for
right.
the future when we don't have an idea where we're going ourselves. And so is there any insights that you have gained in your journey of what might help?
I think it's a really powerful question. And I think it's what came out in the survey of Waldorf graduates, is you have to be able to think. Bottom line, you have to be able to think. You have to be able to think out of the box, because the skills that you're going to teach them today, they're not going to use. She said, why don't you repeat your question? It was a great one.
My question is, I feel like technology is moving faster than we can evolve. And so how do we prepare our children for a future that we don't know what it looks like? And so I'm just...
It's a perfect question. It's the perfect question. And this is why I brought this. It's, first of all, you want them to be healthy physically. You want them to be able to care about other human beings if we're going to have a world. You want them to be able to think beyond what's in front of them. And if you follow what is attempting to be done in Waldorf education, that's what it's trying to do. It's prepare the children to think. If we give them the answers to everything, then they can't figure out the next solution because we don't know what it's going to be. It's exactly right. I mean, every one of us can talk about what something was like, we could go back to before CDs, we can go back to, so many things. We could spend a lot of time on it, but the point is that we don't know what it'll be next year. It is going so fast, you're absolutely right. Think about something Steve Jobs said. When he went to Reed College and he dropped out, he took a calligraphy class. When he started to design the computers, he loved the elegance of design. He brought that artistic aspect. He wasn't a very nice man. My son works for Apple. But he had a brilliance. But he understood design, and he said that calligraphy class gave him this understanding and appreciation of space, form. Now, he wasn't taking that because one day he was going to design a computer, but he had a capacity. And I think that what we're trying to do in Waldorf education, to the best of our capacity, is develop capacities. Because with capacities, you can see what's coming, you can see what might have to happen that's not there right now. That's what we can give our children. And by rushing them into becoming what somebody else has decided isn't doing that. It isn't doing that. And I think that if Waldorf education gives anything to the world, and now we have graduates all over the world, it's that capacity to think outside the box. And by gosh, we need it. Thank you.
Thank you.